Alright guys, so in today's video I wanted to go over 4 winners and also 4 losers post-draft for the Green Bay Packers. And what I mean by this is there was a lot of positions up for grab, a lot of players already on this roster that may have seen a lot of snaps last year, but after the draft and the Packers adding 11 players and adding a lot of depth at certain positions, there definitely are some winners on this roster after the draft, whose job is really secure. But there also are some losers whose job is definitely not secure, might not even end up being on the roster come week 1. So in today's video, we are going to go over the 4 most important winners on the roster after the draft and the 4 most important losers on the roster after the draft. The Green Bay Packers have made 35 draft picks in the last 3 years, which is absolutely insane. So there's always a lot of rotation at certain positions, a lot of competition, which we love, which we like to see. You want competition throughout the offseason, throughout the season as well, because that makes your team better. And this year is no exception, adding 11 players, including 3 safeties, including 3 offensive linemen, another running back, a couple linebackers, even another quarterback. And if you guys are a new viewer to this channel and want more Packers news analysis and updates throughout the entire offseason, breaking down news, going over certain players, the salary cap, if anything changes there as well, you'll find it all here on this channel. So if that does interest you, definitely go down and click subscribe. I appreciate everyone who has subscribed and watches the videos. Thank you guys. All right, so let's start this thing with the first winner post-draft, post-2024 draft for the Green Bay Packers, and I have Jordan Love as the first winner. And you might be thinking, why Jordan Love? They didn't add a single wide receiver or a tight end in this draft. Well, that was already established. We know this wide receiver room is established with Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, Jaden Reed, Tay Wicks, Bo Melton, and Malik Heath. And that's why the Packers didn't draft a single wide receiver. And the same goes for tight end. I thought maybe they could have got a tight end like Jaheim Bell there in the 6th round. But we all know it's established with Tucker Kraft, Luke Musgrave, and you could even throw Ben Sims into the mix as a 3rd string, inline type of tight end. So those positions were already established. So Jordan Love is already a winner because those positions are so established. But why I have him as a winner today is because they invested heavily back into the offensive line. Now, throughout the offseason, the Packers lost 2 guys that, have seen a significant amount of snaps. David Bakhtiari, not as of late. He didn't see any significant amount of snaps, but we all know what he once was. We know he was an all-pro left tackle, and when healthy, one of the best left tackles in the NFL. We all kind of saw it coming. We all thought the Packers would end up cutting David Bakhtiari, and they did. Luckily, Rasheed Walker stepped up to the plate last year and was a manageable left tackle at that position. But the Packers also decided to not bring back Josh Nijman, who, maybe not a starter quality tackle for an entire season, but some very important depth. And we know how important depth is at the offensive line, and he could play either tackle in a pinch. So that was important as well. So going into this draft, we knew the Packers needed offensive line depth and competition, and man, they definitely added that. They added 3 total offensive linemen in this draft, including a 1st-round draft selection in Jordan Morgan. The last time the Packers spent a 1st-round pick on an offensive lineman was 13 years ago, and we're not going to mention his name because I'm not going to put that bad juju at here. But one of the main takeaways from this draft is protecting the future. Protecting Jordan Love. Jordan Morgan may be the future at left tackle for the Green Bay Packers, and he may be a damn good one. But year 1, he could fill in at right guard where the Packers have a pretty massive hole right now. And that's not also mentioning that Jacob Monk could potentially be the future at right guard for the Green Bay Packers out of Duke. Some inside-outside versatility in terms of center into guard. Jordan Morgan has the versatility from tackle to guard, likely a future tackle. That's probably what the Packers see him as. But at the end of the day, it's about putting the best 5 offensive linemen out there, and that could be Morgan at left tackle, Elton Jenkins at left guard, Zach Tom at center, either Myers or Monk at right guard, and Rasheed Walker at right tackle. It's about putting the best 5 out there, and when you do so, that makes Jordan Love a winner because he's able to be protected, has more time in the pocket to find his receivers downfield. So that's why I have Jordan Love as the first winner after this draft. For the first loser after this draft, I have A.J. Dillon. So they brought back A.J. Dillon before the draft on a 4-year qualifying contract, a type of contract I have yet to see until this point. It's basically a no guarantee type of contract to a 4th-year player. You don't see it often. It's basically the fact that A.J. Dillon wanted to stay in Green Bay is why this offer was signed. Normally, a player would not sign this offer. They'd be able to get at least some guarantees or a little bit more money elsewhere. But this is a no-risk type of contract for the Green Bay Packers. They could go through this offseason and cut A.J. Dillon. So even before the draft, before drafting a running back in the third round, this deal wasn't in favor of A.J. Dillon. It's only a $1.2 million deal for the Green Bay Packers. And like I said, if they move on from him, they'll get that $1.2 million back. Then in this draft, in the third round, the Packers went and drafted Marshawn Lloyd, running back from USC in the third round. And we're all kind of wondering when the Packers would draft a running back in this draft. We all kind of saw it coming. I didn't think it would be as early as the third round, but this just showcases that the Packers are trying to upgrade that running back number 2 spot and get a guy for the future, because it seems like they don't see A.J. Dillon as either at this point. And this draft pick of Marshawn Lloyd, depending how this offseason goes, this training camp, this OTA, could very well push A.J. Dillon off the roster. Now, in my opinion, I think it's a good idea just to keep him on the roster for that cheap. It's like, why not? Even if he's the third running back, it's cheap. It's good to have 3 running backs in case injuries happen. A lot of people might say, we'll just keep Emmanuel Wilson on the roster for cheaper, and I get that. But A.J. Dillon has a lot more experience. He's good in pass protection. He can catch the ball. Maybe they could put him at H-back. We'll see how that goes. But he's still a loser after this draft because of Marshawn Lloyd. We know Josh Jacobs, running back number 1. And by week 1, Marshawn Lloyd very well could be running back number 2, and A.J. Dillon could be seeing very, very, very limited snaps or simply just special team snaps. For the second winner on this list post-draft, I have wide receivers Bo Melton and Malik Heath. And as I mentioned earlier, the Packers didn't draft a single wide receiver. They didn't even at first sign a single undrafted free agent wide receiver. Since then, they have yesterday and Julian Hicks and Dimitri Stanley, but that doesn't affect Bo Melton and Malik Heath, in my opinion, at least not right now. So as I said earlier, the 6 wide receivers, at least the first 6, in my opinion, are locked, and that's pushing Samori Toure out to the 7th. Had high hopes from the last 2 seasons, but at this point, it's Bo Melton and Malik Heath's job to lose. And the Packers very evidently believe in their current wide receiver room. It's a very talented wide receiver room. When you have guys like Bo Melton at number 5, when he very well could be a 3rd or 4th wide receiver on most NFL rosters, and then you have an undrafted free agent from last year, Malik Heath, who's a very solid role player, a great run blocker, but can go up and make a catch when needed and fill in next man up mentality when needed. Man, this wide receiver room is so talented, and you can see why the Packers still didn't draft a single wide receiver in this draft class when this was one of the strongest wide receiver draft classes in a very long time. That just says how much the Packers believe in not only their first 4 guys with Dobbs, Watson, Reed, and Wicks, but their back-end guys as well, with Bo Melton, Malik Heath, maybe even Grant DeBose, Samori Toure. It really, it's a deep group. There's a lot of depth there. There's going to be a lot of competition. I'm very excited for OTAs. I'm very excited for training camp with these wide receivers to see them progress even further. Guys like Tay Wicks, who we saw the flashes year 1. Jaden Reed saw the flashes year 1. I think both of these guys are going to take tremendous jumps and very well could be, 1 and 2 in terms of leading the team in yards receiving. It's hard to guess right now who's going to be number 1, number 2, number 3 in terms of yards at the end of the 2024 season. That's how talented this group is. Next on the loser list, I have Keyshawn Nixon. Now, if you guys watch my channel, you know how I've pretty much all offseason been wanting an upgrade at that nickel defender for this Packers defense. So outside of Carrington Valentine, Keyshawn Nixon is the only non-first or second rounder starting on that defense. Carrington Valentine, you could argue maybe Eric Stokes starts over him and then there's another first rounder, but everyone else that's slated to start on this defense is a first or second rounder. If you're looking at like a 4-2 front and not including Isaiah McDuffie, which they're going to be in nickel most of the time anyways, which would include Keyshawn Nixon on the field. So I've always wanted to upgrade this position, and I feel the Packers did. Will it happen right away with Javon Bullard? It probably won't. The Packers just gave Keyshawn Nixon a 3-year deal, a pretty hefty one, but that also is tied into the fact that he's an all-pro kick returner with the new kick return rules, so it was very smart for the Packers just to pay him money and get him back into the building because that completely changed this whole offseason, the kick return rules and whatnot. But the Green Bay Packers adding Javon Bullard says one thing, that they want to upgrade the nickel spot at least in the future, and they want to have a backup plan this season in case Nixon continues to be inconsistent like he was last year. In my opinion, Javon Bullard, their second-round pick out of Georgia at safety, or they listed him as a safety, I believe his best in the NFL will be at a nickel cornerback, kind of similar to the Brian Branch of Detroit. He has that same role, right? Drafted as a safety, but he is a nickel defender. And I think Javon Bullard has a lot of similar traits as Brian Branch. In year one, probably a deep safety, but I think they're still going to move him around. Like, he's going to get some nickel snaps, maybe some snaps in the box. They've already been doing that in the rookie minicamp, just moving him around all over the place. And he can play all three spots. But I think year one, his majority is going to be at deep safety next to Xavier McKinney. But I think in the future, or like I said, if Nixon doesn't play well, it's going to be at nickel corner. And that's why I have Nixon as a loser on this list. Before we dive into the next two winners and the next two losers, I want to give a shout out to today's video sponsor, and that is, of course, Sleeper. And right now on Sleeper, I'm giving away this signed away Christian Watson Packers jersey here. And right now on Sleeper, you can get a first-time deposit match up to $500. That means if you were to deposit $100, then you'll have $200 to play with. Sleeper is a daily fantasy sports app where you can choose between 2 to 8 players. Then you simply choose higher or lower on a specific stat on a player. For example, such as in basketball, you can choose points, you can choose rebounds, assists, triple-double. There's so many different stats to choose from so many different sports. And right now, like I said, you can get an awesome bonus, 100% deposit match up to $500 using code BASS, B-A-S. So to enter in this signed Christian Watson Packers jersey that I'm doing through the month of May, simply go down, download Sleeper, the link's down in the description, make a first-time deposit using code BASS, B-A-S, and that'll enter you in this giveaway. And as I said, also get your first-time deposit matched. Again, thank you so much to Sleeper for sponsoring today's video and sponsoring this awesome giveaway. All right, so now back into the video. Let's dive right back in. And the next winner on this list is Kenny Clark. We all kind of thought, hey, maybe the Packers would go and draft a defensive lineman in this draft. They didn't do so. They did add a couple undrafted free agents after, but nonetheless, they didn't draft a single defensive lineman after switching to a 4-3. And I get why. I think this room already has so much depth. You have Kenny Clark, Devontae Wyatt, TJ Slayton, Colby Wooden, Carl Brooks. You still have Jonathan Ford from a couple years ago. Lucas Van Ness can play inside. There's a lot of depth there. And why I think Kenny Clark is a winner is because he's on the last year of his deal. And we were all kind of sitting here wondering, is Kenny Clark going to get a contract extension? It's not often the Packers give a player a third contract. That rarely happens, but also what rarely happens is a player waiting for his third contract at 28, 29 years old. Usually they're 31, 32, and it's like, okay, we're not going to give him a third contract because he's regressing. Kenny Clark, I think, will progress this year in this new 4-3 scheme. They're different gap assignments, and I think it benefits Kenny Clark tremendously. This 4-3 scheme will allow Kenny Clark to play a lot faster and play to his game. So I think the Packers need to extend Kenny Clark this offseason before this season. And that's why I have him as a winner, because the Packers didn't draft a defensive lineman. If they went and drafted, say, Michael Hall in the second round, I would be sitting here going, okay, they're probably not going to extend Kenny Clark because they have Devontae Wyatt, TJ Slayton, now a high draft pick, Colby Wooden, Carl Brooks. They have so much invested in young talent. They don't need to resign Kenny Clark. But at the same time, defensive linemen right now are simply getting paid like a lot of money, and it's going to keep going up and up and up. So the Packers definitely have to get this done, and I think it does happen this offseason. So we could be looking at two massive extensions for both offense and defense very, very soon with Jordan Love and Kenny Clark. And as I mentioned, Kenny Clark's still only 28. That's why I have him a winner on this list. The Packers didn't go and draft a guy. He's still defensive tackle number 1 and probably will be for years to come on Green Bay. The next loser I have on this list is Royce Newman. Man, the amount we've had to talk about Royce Newman in the past 2 years is way above the amount we should have had to talk about Royce Newman. At this point, I'm shocked he's even on the roster right now, and I think that's going to change very, very soon. The Packers drafted 3 offensive linemen, as well as added Andre Dillard, added Lecitus Smith yesterday, a tryout player who's also a guard. Andre Dillard could play guard, so the Packers added Jordan Morgan, who could play guard. They added Jacob Monk, who could definitely play guard, Dillard and Smith, and also Donovan Jennings and Trent Jones as other undrafted free agents, all of those guys can play guard. So there are so many added guard players, not to mention the ones that are already on the roster with Sean Ryan. Maybe Josh Myers moved over to guard if Zach Tom does indeed play center. So there's a ton of talent on this roster right now that can compete for guard day one. And that massive hole right now is at right guard. Like, obviously Elton Jenkins is staying at left guard and no one's taking that spot. That much is very clear. Now, Royce Newman barely saw any snaps the last 3/4 of last season. He saw some early because Elton Jenkins was hurt, right? He had to fill in, and the same old happened. Royce Newman getting beat over and over and over again, and us fans saying, why in the world is he out there? And right now, I'd say in terms of right guard and who could potentially start at that spot, I wouldn't even put Royce Newman in the conversation. I have Sean Ryan, Jacob Monk, Jordan Morgan, Josh Myers, and Andre Dillard. In terms of week one, who we could see at right guard, I think it's going to be out of that list. It's not going to be Royce Newman. He's okay depth to have, but at the same time, is it really okay depth to have when he is on the field and you're sitting there like pulling your hair out, like get him off the field? Not to mention, Royce Newman has a little bit of a hefty amount of money tied to him right now. It's not crazy, but it's $3.1 million. And there's no reason why the Packers wouldn't cut him because they'll save $3.1 million. So I could see a cut coming very, very soon. And the Packers drafting a lot of guys, adding a lot of undrafted free agents just makes that cut even easier for the Green Bay Packers. So he is definitely a loser on this list. I see Royce Newman definitely not being on the 53-man roster, and even as much as being cut here very soon. Now down to the final winner and the final loser. For the winner, we have Carrington Valentine. So similarly to the wide receiver room with Bo Melton and Malik Heath, Carrington Valentine is a potential starter opposite Jair Alexander, and that remained the same after this draft. We all kind of thought as the board was falling, right, Terrion Arnold fell all the way to 24 where the Lions traded up. Hey, if the Packers really wanted Terrion Arnold, they probably would have went up and got him. But then furthermore, both Kool-Aid McKinstry, Cooper DeJean on the board at 25. The Packers go Jordan Morgan because, they want Jordan Morgan. He's higher on their board. Then all the way back at 41, Cooper DeJean goes right before at 40 due to a trade up with the Eagles. Then at 41, the Packers, Kool-Aid McKinstry sitting on the board, trade back to 45 with the Saints. Saints select Kool-Aid McKinstry, and the Packers go Edgerrin Cooper. So it was very evident. There was like 3, 4, 5 times that the Packers could have added talent to this cornerback room. The board simply didn't fall that way, and Brian Gutekunst didn't feel the need to draft a cornerback because he's comfortable with the current cornerback room. Now, drafted one in the 7th with Kalen King, who I'm definitely high on and could definitely push for some snaps in the future, even as early as this season. But it's very clear that the Packers are comfortable with the guys they have right now, with Carrington Valentine, Eric Stokes and his progression through his injury, even a guy like Corey Ballantyne. Right now, Carrington Valentine is cornerback number 2, in my opinion, opposite Jair Alexander. So that's why I see him as a massive winner post-draft, because if they would have brought in someone like Terrion Arnold, Cooper DeJean, Kool-Aid McKinstry, we all be sitting here going, okay, that guy is cornerback number 2. So now Carrington Valentine is kind of cornerback 4, right? A depth outside cornerback that could come in due to injury or in a dime look, or another guy needs a breather, and that's about it. But he's still cornerback number 2 right now because the Packers didn't invest in a guy that would take his spot in this draft. So he's my final winner on the list. The final loser I have on the list, this one's kind of iffy for me, but it was the last one, and I was like, okay, this still makes sense, and that is Anthony Johnson Jr., last year's 7th round draft selection at safety from Iowa State. Now, I'm still very high on him, and I think at the start of camp, at the start of OTAs, the start of training camp, he could probably see starting snaps next to Xavier McKinney. The Packers very well could put him in that role and then rotate all the guys they drafted in to get them some snaps. Anthony Johnson Jr. saw 334 snaps in 2023, and that was while we had, Darnell Savage, Rudy Ford, John Owens, all of which are gone now. But the Packers added another 3 safeties into the room. So that's why I kind of have Anthony Johnson Jr. here as a loser. He was also the 2nd lowest PFF defensive grade on the team last year, right above Zane Anderson, who barely played on defense. So in terms of significant snaps, Anthony Johnson Jr. was the lowest. Like I said, the Packers drafting 3 safeties in Javon Bullard, Evan Williams, and Katana Oladapo. definitely shakes this up a little bit on like, may the best man win. And that best man may not be Anthony Johnson Jr. There's a lot more competition in that room, in my opinion, right now than there was last year when Anthony Johnson got drafted, right? When you compare them, you compare Darnell Savage, Rudy Ford, and John Owens to Evan Williams, Javon Bullard, and Katana Ladapo. I know the rookies haven't played a snap yet, but I would 100% take the latter every single time over the former there. So that's why I have Anthony Johnson Jr. right now as a loser post-draft. So those are all my winners and losers post-draft for the Green Bay Packers after selecting 11 players, including 3 safeties, 3 offensive linemen, 2 linebackers, a running back pretty early. There's a lot of positions that, were kind of seen as a whole and needed more players, more talent, more depth. And I feel like the Packers did an excellent job doing that, but at the same time, there's players that potentially, would see more snaps and now they're not going to. And that's why I see them as losers after this draft, because clearly the Packers wanted to add better talent into those certain positions. But let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Do you agree with my winners or losers, or do you have one that I maybe didn't list today? Let me know down in the comments below. But I appreciate you guys coming by to the video. If you could, please leave a like down below. Supports the channel a ton, but I'll catch you on the next one. And as always, go Pack Go.